Let's start recording it.
Okay. The thing about the C-47, and it's actually the civilian version, the DC-3, which was built first, is that this aircraft is literally what they call the plane that changed the world.
This one?
Yes, this type of aircraft. The DC-3, which, as I say, was the civilian version, and then C-47 is the military version. And what it was, is what made it so revolutionary was back in the early 1930s when this came out, air travel was using things like the Ford trimotors. You could only go 90 miles an hour, you couldn't go very high, and things like that. This airplane was the first one that they could actually take it up into the smoother air. The wing spar came through under the fuselage, or under the floor, so that whole inside area was open for either passenger seats or cargo. And that's what the Air Force or the Army liked about these airplanes, is the fact that they had a great cargo capacity once you took the seats out of them. And they used these things for cargo. They used them for paratroops in particular. That's how they're most famous, is on D-Day, June 6th, when we invaded Europe. C-47s, including this very aircraft, flew missions dropping paratroopers over France.
Wait, so this plane flew in D-Day?
This plane flew 3 missions on D-Day. It flew one dropping paratroopers from the 101st Airborne. If you've ever watched the movie series Band of Brothers, that was the 101st, although this was a different division, or it wasn't E Company. It was, I think this one was dropping A Company. But yeah, this was with the 89th Troop Carrier Squadron, and it is painted up as it looked on D-Day. But it did one with paratroopers and then 2 trips towing gliders. And then later, the aircraft was involved in Operation Market Garden, where the British tried to end the war more quickly by going up and getting across the Rhine River and using the bridges there in Holland. So they made an attempt to drop paratroopers into Holland behind the Germans and capture all these bridges. Well, the big problem was they dropped them like right into the middle of a huge German force. Not good. They were surrounded from the beginning, and it turned out to be a disaster. But the Americans helped out dropping troops and supplies. So this was on Market Garden, and then after the war, this airplane was used to help take concentration camp survivors out of to hospitals where they could be treated. So this was involved in that. And after the war, ended up with West Coast Airlines. And when it flew with West Coast Airlines, it flew passenger service and eventually was retired and went to the museum at OMSI, when OMSI was on the west side of the city there on the hill. And then from there, when OMSI moved down to the river, they couldn't keep the airplane. They didn't have the room for it, so they gave it to us. But it is, it's probably got more combat time than any other airplane in our collection here. It's got an incredible history to it. But what made them, as I say, was special was they were, again, rugged. I mean, there's been stories of literally where a DC-3 collided with a mountain and tore half the wing off. And they flew it home, and they didn't have another wing for it, so they got one off of its predecessor, the DC-2, and stuck that wing on it and flew it as a DC 2.5. But I mean, they just go and on and on and on. It's like the Energizer Bunny. These airplanes, you can't stop them. They, as I say, designed in 1935. There are still places in the world where they're, like in Africa and the Caribbean and things like that, where they still fly these airplanes in airline service today. So that it's just an incredibly strong design. It was the right airplane at the right time, and again could carry a nice heavy load of cargo. The other thing that they were used on, everybody knows about D-Day and so on and such, but they were also used in the campaign in China, the China-Burma-India theater, and they carried stuff over the Himalayas. And the Himalayas, you're flying over 15,000 foot peaks, so again, kind of like the B-17 where we were talking, you're on oxygen. because there's not enough air to breathe up at that altitude, and so you're flying in horrible weather over these mountain peaks. There's no place to land if you have a problem. They lost over 250 of these aircraft. They used to call that the aluminum highway because there was just wrecked airplanes, because again, you couldn't see where you were going, and sometimes in the clouds, and there'd be a mountain inside it. But they helped keep our allies in China supplied with bombs, bullets, gasoline, and all that kind of stuff. My father happened to have been, his job during the Second World War ended up, he was a truck driver, drove on the Burma Road. So he drove supplies into China, and then they turned over the trucks to the Chinese, and they would fly back on this. So my dad had a lot of stories on these airplanes flying back. Some of them I can't, are probably not the kind of thing you would tell in this dosen story. But one of the ones he used to ride up in the front with the back behind the pilots. And they were up there, and they had a bunch of Chinese troops. And the cargo door on the other side was taken off, and they were flying over the mountains. And co-pilot had to go to the bathroom, which was all the way in the back. And as he came back, he says, "Hey, didn't you have 12 Chinamen in the back?" And I said, "Yeah." "Well, there's only 10 there now." What the hell? I went back and looked, and they watched. What would happen is these guys weren't wearing seatbelts. They'd just get up and they'd go and they'd look out the door. They'd sit there watching out the door, watching somebody else for fun would come up and kick him out the door. And then they would stand there and watch this guy fall. And then one of his buddies would come and kick him out the door. So
Such camaraderie.
They didn't have a lot of, they came back short a few Chinese. But this, as I say, that happened on one of the flights my dad was on. And again, as he says, you get a whole different view of the world and the value of human life after you've been through something like that. And again, he was only 23 at the time that he went through all of that. Again, with the C-47s, they later, these things were still flying up until the 1970s with the Air Force, because they were just such useful airplanes. In fact, one version of it they called Puff the Magic Dragon. They mounted guns, pointed out rotary cannons mounted off one side, and the pilot would have a gun sight. He would look down, and what you do is if you're flying an airplane in a circle like this end's always pointed down at the ground. So if you had something you wanted to take out on the ground, you just went into one of these circles and started shooting at it. So you had this concentrated cone of fire. And so these things were devastating. In the Vietnamese War, the North Vietnamese hated these things because of the fact that they could just bring down such incredible firepower. And again, it was just these rotary cannons mounted in the guns that would shoot out several thousand rounds a minute. And they could just pick up targets. And then later they went on to using C-119s and C-130s as gunships. They still use C-130s as gunships today. But this was kind of the inventor of the gunship. In fact, my dad told me of one situation where he went along in Burma, and there were a bunch of British troops down between two mountains. And they kind of became the first gunship because the Japanese were up on the mountains and the troops were down below, and they had to get supplies to them. So my dad was on board. He would kick the supplies out of the aircraft, and they had parachutes on them. Well, of course, the Japanese on the ridges are shooting at them. So what they did is they mounted a machine gun in one of the windows, and which the Japanese weren't expecting. And as they flew down the pass, they just let loose and shot up the troops on the mountain, made them run for cover while they made their supply drops. So, as I say, it was a very versatile airplane, incredibly strong airplane, incredibly reliable. And again, it literally, because of that, it changed air travel forever, and it really brought us into the air age. If you have to say, okay, the most important aircraft, I suppose you would say, is the Wright brothers, Wright Flyer, because that's the first airplane to fly. But if you had to literally pick the top two airplanes of all time on their importance level, that would be number two, right behind the Wright Flyers, because of just it was the right airplane at the right time, and has remained that way. So, and I see it. I'm 1 minute from your shutdown time, so I better let you go so that you can get to get to where you're going.
Okay.
Any questions, quick while?
Not really. It seems like an incredible aircraft.
Yeah, and as I say, and it's the same thing as a DC-3,
Yeah.
except the DC-3 is a passenger version. This
Is there any other modifications besides obviously guns?
No, some of these they use for electronics warfare, for listening in. They put you see all sorts of antennas mounted on the top, and they would fly them for using listening devices. In Vietnam, they've been modified for doing all sorts of things. The first airplane to the South Pole was a Navy. The Navy called them R4Ds. Instead of C-47, but same thing. But the first airplane, it was named C-47, was the first airplane to land at the South Pole. Yep. C-47, which is in the Navy Museum in Pensacola. That was the first airplane to the South Pole, the C-47. So, I mean, yeah, these things hold all sorts of records and did all sorts of incredible things. And literally, they've operated on every continent. They even launched during Operation High Jump. In 1947, they launched these off of aircraft carriers onto the Antarctic ice shelf. So yeah, they took off from a carrier and had skis on the bottom, on the wheels, and would land on the. And they had to have extra JATO, jet assist rocket bottles to give them the extra oomph to get them off the aircraft carrier. But yeah, they're just as I say, truly amazing airplanes. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, thank you.